It's just so cool, you guys. And the other cool thing about history is that you see how many times we've just repeated this loop over and over again. We keep learning new things, forgetting about it, screwing up, doing new things. It's ridiculous. I can't tell you how many times throughout history carbs were bad, then fat, then protein, then back to fat, then carb. It's ridiculous, but also pretty cool. Hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of Let Me Learn Ya, where I, your friendly neighborhood dietitian, Lana McCarthy, share with you everything that I've learned, everything that I've read, which is a lot, because I am obsessed with reading clinical trials and journal articles and just finding out everything there is to know about the human body, nutrition, what's going on, what's the latest, greatest. I'm also here to answer any of your questions, which I love doing, which leads me to our topic today, and that is intermittent fasting. I have been getting questions about my opinion on intermittent fasting on TikTok and here on YouTube, so here it is. And warning, this is going to be a two-parter because there is just too much information to cover in one video. Part one of this series, which is this video, will be talking about the history of fasting, how fasting actually impacts your body from a metabolic standpoint, which is super cool. Stick around for that. And lastly, we'll be talking about the types of fasting because there are literally I think 7 different types now. There could be more. People are always coming up with new things. It's hard to keep up on all the trends. Part 2, we'll be digging into the research, which also is super fascinating. I'll be giving my professional opinion on where I stand, given what the research says. We'll be talking about who are possibly good candidates for intermittent fasting, who should not consider intermittent fasting, and then some things you'll want to consider if you do decide to attempt intermittent fasting. I'm assuming you've heard the usual extreme sides. That's all we are nowadays, right? There's hardly any in between. Social media doesn't allow that. You've probably heard the side that are the proponents of fasting. They claim that the weight will just melt off your body. You'll maintain all of your muscle mass. You'll never have to worry about dieting again. It cures cancer. It helps with digestion. It'll put hair back on your head. The extreme. It's the absolute perfect solution for everything. It's going to change your life. Then you've probably heard the extreme opposite side, which are the people who are anti-fasting. And usually what you hear them say is, it's just another stupid fad diet. There's absolutely no research supporting this. It's not any more successful than any other type of restrictive diet. It's the diet version of snake oil salesmen, just promoting all of these benefits that are total BS. You're probably going to die if you try it. You're going to develop an eating disorder. You might even be abducted by aliens. Just the two absolute extreme sides, right? And in typical fashion, I am snugly yet uncomfortably right in the middle, because that means that, lucky me, I get to argue with everybody all the time. My purpose of this video is not to really pick a side, but just to provide to you all of the information that you've been curious about so that you can make a decision on your own and with the help and support of your healthcare provider. I am not somebody who believes that telling somebody not to do something is going to keep them from not doing it. I would prefer that you have all the information at your fingertips so that if you decide to do something like this, you can do it safely. So let's get into it. The fasting that I'm going to be talking about is purposeful fasting. So you've got plenty of food around you, you're not in a famine, you have plenty of money, and you are choosing not to eat food. This type of fasting has been around since time immemorial. We know that ancient Greece, ancient China, ancient India, they were all practicing different versions of intermittent fasting for different types of reasons. They can be religious reasons, political reasons, medical reasons. That's thousands of years, you guys. So let's dig into religious fasting first. Practically every religion has some type of fasting worked into their practice of that religion, whether that's fasting, like periodic fasting, like for 30 days, 40 days. It could be fasting from sunset to sunrise. It could be fasting from certain specific types of foods for certain periods of time. Every freaking religion has it in some form or the other. Even spiritual practices such as Buddhism, which isn't considered a religion, has fasting worked into their practices. Does Satanism have fasting worked into it? Mormonism? I would love to hear from people if they practice a religion that has absolutely no type of fasting involved, because it seems to be a common thread throughout religions. I don't want to make this video 1,000 years long, so I'm not going to talk about all the different religions and how they practice, but I will be talking about some of the reasons why certain religions practice fasting. It can be to refresh and invigorate the soul, to prepare one's body and mind for spiritual types of practices, to prepare your brain to be able to see and speak to various types of deities and gods, to observe the trials and tribulations of gods or deities or spiritual beings, such as Jesus fasting in the desert for 40 days, or Siddhartha Gautama, who fasted by eating one bit of rice every day for 6 years, to prove devotion or morality by subduing human needs. Some religions practice fasting to observe the plight of others, knowing that unfortunately there are millions of people in this world who are going hungry every day, and putting yourself in their shoes by choosing to fast and experience what they go through. Fasting has been used to express social and political views. Famously, Mahatma Gandhi took part in several well-publicized fasts in order to protest the British occupation in India. I discovered that there are deep roots in Irish society of hunger strikes. One of the longest recorded fasts of a non-obese person for political reasons was of a Irish mayor from Cork, Ireland, who was protesting during the Irish English unrest in the 1920s. He fasted for 75 days and sadly ended up dying. Numerous Irish Republican Army members would go on hunger strikes in jail, with many of them eventually dying as well. British and American suffragettes famously used hunger strikes to protest. One of the sad things about this is some of the suffragettes would get so sick in jail while they were doing their hunger strike that they would be taken from jail, force-fed, and then placed back in jail to finish their sentence. I'm sorry, I'm going to butcher this man's name. I could not find how to pronounce it anywhere. Guillermo Farinas, as late as 2006, did a 7-month hunger strike to protest internet censorship in Cuba. So this is still going on. People are still hunger striking all over the place. Maybe not all over the place. That's a little dramatic. Lastly, fasting has been used for medical purposes. We have written record, again, thousands of years ago, of these cultures using fasting for different types of medical treatments. As far back as 5th century BCE, Hippocrates recommended fasting for various disease states. Now, the ancient Greeks observed that in times of illness, the body would almost naturally go into this fasting mode. Not only were they observing this in humans, but they were also observing it in animals, that the body just kind of naturally decides, we're not going to focus on food right now, we're going to heal. And so they believed that getting in the way of that by feeding somebody was actually getting in the way of the healing process. Ancient Greeks were also, as far as we know, the first to observe that fasting reduced incidences of epileptic seizures. Now, that old, ancient, literally ancient Greek information will travel through the years of time and all the timelines to eventually get to what is now arguably one of the most controversial diets, short of when its new baby cousin came out, the carnivore diet. But all that information led to the ketogenic diet, which we will talk about. It's so cool, you guys. History? Oh, I love history.
Thousands of years later.
So a lot of stuff happened throughout all those thousands of years. People were fasting on and off. Then we jump ahead, because that's just, for some reason, it's not really recorded that well. We fast forward to the 1800s, 1900s, and a lot more information started coming out around then. In the mid 1800s, Dr. Dewey, I just love that. Dr. Dewey, no, it's just me. Okay. In his book, The True Science of Living, wrote, "Every disease that afflicts mankind develops from more or less habitual eating in excess of the supply of gastric juices." There were doctors that were starting to write about their theory that people were eating too much or too often, and in order to contradict illness and weight, fasting was the way to go. Throughout the 1800s, various doctors and individuals who weren't doctors, because back then they were like, whatever, you're a doctor, you're not, you can call yourself a doctor, who cares? Various records of fasting being used for obese individuals and putting them on fasting regimens of 20 to 40 plus days and having amazing results from those. I'm sure they didn't do any long-term studies, and they weren't exactly accurate, and there was probably no control group, but whatever. Scientists reporting how they saw that fasting would actually reduce incidence and growth of cancers and also prolong the lifespan in animals, both of which have actually been reproduced in studies since. In 1915, a paper came out from Follin and Dennis. It's so old I can't even get Dennis's first name, but Follin is Otto, in case you care, which reported that short-term periods of fasting was actually found to be safe and beneficial for various types of disease states and for weight. And then when we get into the keto stuff, it was around 1910, where scientists were trying to figure out what is it about fasting that is beneficial for people who have epilepsy. And they were getting really close around 1910 because they narrowed it down to a change in acid balance in the human body. They were so close because, well, you'll find out. In 1924, Dr. Wilder was the first to identify that when a human being fasts, the liver produces something called ketones from the fat in your body, from your fat storage or fat that's coming in from the diet. And he theorized that it's the ketones that were helping with these seizures. The problem is that children and individuals who had epilepsy couldn't fast forever. First of all, it's very hard to do. Second of all, there are negative ramifications of fasting for long periods of time. So he had figured out that if you reduce the carbohydrates drastically, replace the calories with fat and some protein, that the people won't feel like they're starving all the time, and they will also have this reduction in epileptic seizures. So the benefits of not being starved while the body thinks it's being starved, much more sustainable, and your seizures are fixed. That is how the ketogenic diet was birthed. Interestingly enough, though, there are records of people following that type of diet before it was even officially called the ketogenic diet and reporting on its use for diabetes and weight loss. History, the more you know. God, I'm thirsty and my mouth is dry. So, as you've learned, fasting in some way, shape, or form has a very long history of being used for religious purposes, for political purposes, and medical purposes. So now that brings us to today. The types of fasting that reigned supreme were water fasts and juicing fasts. These fasts promoted weight loss, detoxing, the word that every registered dietitian and health professional loves, resting your digestive system, giving it a break, and promoting that various health benefits were achieved, such as reduced blood pressure, reduced cholesterol, reduced fasting blood glucose, yada yada. Juicing really blew up around 2010 with the release of a documentary called Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead. It followed a man named Joe Cross in his 60-day journey of mainly subsisting on just fruit and vegetable juice. His body composition changes and the health benefits that he experienced during this fast blew everybody's minds. It blew his mind, so much so that he wrote books and started speaker series and all kinds of stuff because he truly believed that this is what people needed to do in order to be healthy. Juicing was king until 2 years later when the 5-2 diet came out. This was a British documentary made by Michael Mosley that really looked into the effects that fasting has on the human body, specifically intermittent fasting. This diet blew up, and it blew up like a big bang explosion. From the 5-2 diet came alternate day fasting and alternate day modified fasting, time restricted feeding, and all kinds of one meal a day fasting. And it was just everybody was fasting. The entire world started fasting. All these books started coming out. It was fasting chaos. So today you can't just say, oh, I'm fasting, because somebody's going to ask you, oh, but what type of fasting? Because there's so many different types. So what are those types of fasting? We're going to talk about it. Firstly, there is what is known as the classical caloric continuous energy restriction. That is the type of diet that we're all used to. Your daily caloric intake, mainly the amount of food that you take in, can be reduced from anywhere from 10% to 50-60% every day. This is considered a fasting actually, but it's a continuous fast. Then there is the 5-2 diet, which we just talked about, which is you eat ad libitum, which means you eat whatever you want, how much you want, 5 days during the week. And then for 2 non-consecutive days, so you can't do like, I fast Tuesday and Wednesday, it's got to be Tuesday and Thursday or Tuesday and Friday, you drop your caloric intake by about 75% of what you would normally take in. Generally, what they recommend is that women eat no more than 500 calories on their fasting days and men no more than 600 calories. Then there's alternate day fasting, which is very similar to 5-2, but not really. So it's literally every other day you fast. Now there's 2 different types of this. There's alternate day fasting where you eat whatever you want on Monday. Tuesday, nothing but water. No calories. Nothing. And then Wednesday, you eat like normal again. There's also modified alternate day fasting, which is a bit more similar to the 5-2 diet, where on Monday, you eat what you want. On Tuesday, you drop your calories by about 75%. So again, around that 500, 600 calorie mark. And then Wednesday, you eat normally. Then there's time restricted feeding, or some call it time window restriction or window restricted feeding or whatever. But basically it's that you are fasting every day, but only during certain time periods of the day. So the most popular one is the 16-8, they call it, where you're fasting for 16 hours of the day and you only eat within an 8-hour window. So an example of this is you would stop eating after 7 p.m. You wouldn't eat a drop of food. You go to sleep, you wake up, you do your thing, and you would not start eating again until 11 a.m. There's a lot of argument going on about whether black tea, coffee are allowed during these times. A lot of people are like, there aren't any calories in there, so who cares? Some people argue that coffee has a negative effect on fasting. Other people say it actually supports it. I don't care. How do you like that? I don't care. I think there's more important things to worry about in life. Yeah. So people do longer windows of this, they do shorter windows of this. It depends, but the most common one is the 16-8. Then there's a type of fasting where you're just skipping meals. So it could be you skip breakfast, you eat lunch and dinner. There's OMAD, or 1 meal a day, where people will, you guessed it, only eat 1 meal a day. But they'll eat all the calories that they need to sustain their body in that 1 meal. Some people find that very difficult. Then there's the unique kind of outlier child, and that's called the fast mimicking diet. This diet was originally discovered by Dr. Walter Longo.
You have something that is a diet that mimics fasting, kind of tricks our body into thinking we're fasting, and it does some remarkable things. Talk about that, if you will.
Right. So that came from our studies of the genetics of aging and really connecting components of the diet with genes. Mm-hmm. Once we understood the connection between certain ingredients, for example, proteins that are contained in the diet, they activate something called TOR, cis kinase, and sugars in the diet activate something called pKa. So once we made the connection, then we could develop a diet that people could eat and it'd be fairly normal diet, but give them the same effects or very similar effects as they would get if they were just drinking water. And by the way, let me just first say the fasting mimicking that was tested clinically in a randomized study at USC and showed improvement in cholesterol, blood pressure, triglycerides, and risk factors for cancer and cardiovascular disease.
The fast mimicking diet eases you in on the first day by dropping your calories to about 1,100. And then for the rest of the days, it's closer to around 700 to 800. It's also different from other fasting methods in that it's a 5-day diet, and it's recommended that if you have health issues such as diabetes, prediabetes, you're overweight or obese, that you repeat it for 3 months and then go into like a maintenance phase where you repeat it less frequently. So what happens to your body depends on the type of fast, the length of time of the fast, and also the state that your body is in before you do that fast. So keep that in mind. I'm speaking in general terms here. The main thing that happens is a metabolic shift of your body from one state to another state, and all the things that happen when your body makes that shift. This metabolic shift typically happens anywhere from 12 to 36 hours after you haven't taken in carbohydrates or food. Your body's main and preferred energy source is glucose. Glucose is the most basic, tiny, broken down sugar molecule that comes from your food, mainly from carbohydrates. Normally, your body uses glucose to fuel everything in your entire body. Your whole purpose of your body is to keep you alive. And therefore, your body has come up with this little MacGyver plan with bubblegum and paper clips to keep you alive when you don't have food coming in. Your body shifts from using glucose, whether that's coming from your food or from your liver producing it, to ketones, which are created from your fat stores. Work almost like a spare tire, feeding as many cells in your body as it can with this alternate form of energy. Ketones can provide most of your cells with energy, but it's very important to understand that not all of them can use ketones, specifically your red blood cells, which are arguably very important to keeping you alive. This is why even when you are starving or you are drastically reducing your carbohydrates, your liver, while it's also shooting out ketones to anybody else who needs it, is still creating glucose from protein and fat. So that's the main thing. That's the big difference that happens when you go into starvation mode. But it's also been observed in various animal studies that other types of metabolic molecular changes happen when you're in this fasted state. So they have noticed a reduced rate of oxidative damage in the cells, enhanced cellular turnover, so like getting rid of crappy old cells, and then also protein synthesis, new proteins, new cells. So studies have shown that when we'll just call it the master clock in the brain and cells are desynchronized, that bad things happen. Disease, chronic disease, all kinds of crap. What's been observed to cause that desynchronization is habitual eating, eating at night, eating late at night, not getting enough sunlight exposure, things that kind of get your body out of the regular rhythm of we are up in the daytime, we eat during the daytime, we go to sleep, and we are not exposed to light at nighttime. And that fasting helps bring this rhythm back onto its normally scheduled program, if you will. There's also discussions of autophagy, which is basically it takes cells that aren't functioning the way they normally should be and breaks down those cells and reutilizes their parts to fuel other processes in the body or make new cells. One of the players in that is something called mTOR, which we will talk about later. It's super fascinating. Get ready for it. Basically, to sum up, what has been observed is that in a fasted state, your body makes this metabolic shift from using glucose as energy to ketones. During this period of time, certain hormones are turned on and turned off, and all this wackadoo stuff happens, such as autophagy, growth hormones reduced, insulin is reduced, glucose is reduced. Your body goes from we're going to build, we're going to store, we're going to use all this fancy new energy we just got in food and not worry about anything else, to, oh crap, we don't have food. Maybe we've got to make do with what we have. And it puts all the growth on hold, all the storage on hold, and instead starts mobilizing stored fat, getting it out of there, using it for energy, starts tearing down old things that it doesn't need and repurposing it for new things. That shift is why there are proponents of fasting. So you have learned that there is a long history of fasting. This is not something new. This is just something old, repurposed and tied up in pretty little package bows, being renamed by science bros and British journalists and, all kinds of people to sell their books and be like, hey, here's the new thing. Well, it's not. We've been doing this for a long time. The holy month of Ramadan is literally just time-restricted fasting without the name. You now have learned about the main types of fasting, such as the 5-2 diet, alternate day fasting, modified alternate day fasting, time-restricted window fasting, and whatever they call it, skipping meals fasting, juice fasting, water fasting. And lastly, you've learned what happens in the human body when you fast, that there is this metabolic shift that occurs from using glucose as energy to using ketones as energy, and that instead of being all about build, store, the body's all about break down, reutilize, become more efficient. There's that phrase, scarcity is the mother of invention. When human beings don't have a lot to work with, we come up with better ways to use what we have, right? And that's what your body's doing when you're fasting. It's like, okay, well, I guess we're kind of screwed here. It's no longer a party. We got to figure out how to use this stuff in more efficient ways. But spoiler alert, everybody, just like everything in this world, there's always got to be a balance. And if you fast too much, bad things are going to happen. Just like if you eat too much, bad things are going to happen. So in part 2, you're going to learn more about what have we observed? What does the research say? Is this a good thing? Is it the last diet you'll ever have to do? Does it work for everybody? Is it super great because you'll save money? I don't know. I've been talking too long and I have to eat lunch, but I don't want to because I need to finish filming this stuff because I have to Zoom with my parents at 3. What time is it? That's your summary, folks. That's the foundation. We're going to get into the meat and potatoes of it in part 2. So I hope to see you there. I hope you enjoyed this video. I would love to hear from you guys if you have tried fasting, what you think about it. And also leave comments about anything that you would like, any topic you would like me to cover in the future, because comments are what inspired this video. So hope you guys have a wonderful day and I'll see you later. Bye. I am recording, right?